My name is David Ivanov, and I'm an undergraduate here at UC Davis and a director of medical programming here at our conference. So first, I'd like to thank the AAMC for sponsoring this event and broadcasting it live for viewers across the globe. These questions have been sourced from students worldwide, and unfortunately, we will not be taking questions from the audience, but if you'd like, you can tweet questions at hashtag UCDPHSA14. So before we begin, I'd like each panelist to provide their name, their title, and their institution, starting with Dr. Adrian Jones.
Good morning. Good morning. Wow. It's just, can we get some energy in here? Is it just me? I mean, am I missing something? Like, I know it's Sunday. Come on, folks, we can work. Thank you. There we go. Good job. Good job. All right. My name is Adrian Jones. I'm the Associate Dean for Students at Florida International University, Herbert Wertheim College of Medicine.
Good morning. My name is Leon McDougle. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer of the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, and welcome.
Good morning. My name is Alison Martin. I am the Director of Admissions at the University of Missouri School of Medicine.
Good morning. I am Jean Shelton. I'm the Director of Admission at Western Michigan University Homer Stryker M.D. School of Medicine.
And good morning. I'm Walter Hartwig. I'm the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and the Chair of Admissions at Touro University College of Osteopathic Medicine in Vallejo, California, about 65 miles up the road.
Thank you. Our first question, and this goes out to anyone who this applies to. For schools that don't do multiple mini interviews, why do you stick to the traditional interview? Sorry. For schools that don't do multiple mini interviews, why do you stick to the traditional interview?
I can speak to that for the Ohio State University College of Medicine. So we investigated a number of different ways to enhance our interviewing day for our applicants. Actually, we convened a task force and looked at multiple mini interviews along with other interview techniques used by schools of medicine across the country. So we decided to create a hybrid whereby we took some of the best from the various processes for interview. So one, we've incorporated blind interviews for the candidates that we invite for interviews. So the initial interview involves a student and a faculty member. They do not have access to your MCAT or GPA because we want to really learn more about you as a person and have you speak to your experiences and just demonstrate your attributes to round out the holistic review. And with that also, that determination is then forwarded to a committee that deliberates on the scores and ratings by the interviewers. And the deliberation committee, they weren't involved with the interview process. And a vote is taken in regards to your strength of candidacy for the College of Medicine. And then it finally goes to our admissions committee to make a final determination.
Would anyone else like to elaborate?
I can also weigh in on the absence of a multiple mini interview format. The format is very effective at standardizing the exposure that the medical school has to each candidate because it provides a series of similar or identical question stations over the whole course of the admission cycle. So it's very good for the institution, but it's also resource intensive, takes a lot of people and a lot of training to manage. And for a program such as ours, which is relatively small, and has felt over time that our traditional interview format has yielded the class structure that we are looking for. It would represent a change from something that we perceive to have been successful for us to a system that may or may not be successful for us, but would require many more resources and personnel in order to achieve. So that's the more tactical reason that we haven't moved to it. As was mentioned previously, and I think is true for all of the panelists, we're very interested to know as much about you as an individual as we can, and it just so happens that our method of reviewing your file very carefully and conducting a live interview that might be more subjective and vary across the year depending on the candidate, nonetheless has yielded for us a demographic of students who fit our mission, and so that it's more a lack of a will to change and the resources needed to change it that keep us in a traditional format.
Thank you. Dr. Jones, is an interviewee expected to be well-versed in current trends in healthcare?
That's a tough question. I think we're looking for students who are intellectually aware, intellectually curious, who actually knows what's going on in the world around them so that they're not just stuck in a microcosm of where they live, or I mean, what's happening with current events. Again, what's happening with Ebola. I mean, a lot of things are happening as right now in current events, but in terms of healthcare, there's so many transitions. I actually don't even know a lot about what's a lot going on with healthcare, but I do want students who are intellectually curious. And I'm not saying I don't know what's going on with healthcare. There's a lot going on with healthcare. You take Obamacare and you try to break it down. I could give you somewhat of an answer, but I want to know that you're aware of what's happening in the trends. What do you see is happening in medicine? What could you forecast? There's potentials that happen in so many different areas. And you, as a medical student, we're always trying to figure out, how does your mind work? What are you thinking about? How do you see people around you? And how can you relate to other people? So what skills and qualities do you have to relate to someone else? And I think that's really what we're trying to figure out. Are you stuck in one world, or can you live in several different worlds? And information helps you with that process. So when you're coming in for interviewing, can you speak to a number of different tasks? Do you know what's going on around you? What are you interested in, and how can you convey that to someone else? I think that's a hard question to ask someone if they know everything about healthcare. I don't think anybody on this panel knows everything about healthcare because of the worlds that we live in, but we know enough that we can relate to each other and we can relate to the people that we ultimately want to serve.
I agree with that completely. I want to give an example of something that happened just a couple weeks ago. An individual came in for an interview and was very excited about international medicine, and yet couldn't answer any questions about Ebola and what's happening, and you know what they see are the issues that are present that are preventing the spread and so forth. Likewise, if you say, I really want to serve the underserved, well, you need to have a good understanding of what that means with regard to the healthcare system. So just be careful if you're trying to promote yourself in a certain area with regard to a healthcare system or a type of delivery. Make sure you've done your homework and you truly know that's what you want to do and can speak to that.
Also, I'd like to add, so reframe the question and look at it from a standpoint of, okay, you've done the shadowing, you may have worked with various health professionals. What did you learn about the patients that you saw with that clinician during that time that you were shadowing? This really speaks to the question, okay, well, say you were shadowing a physician in an underserved community. You should be able to speak to some of the experiences of those patients, how that affected you, and how would you make a change to improve access to care, to improve healthcare outcomes, because many of you, all of you really, you're shadowing somebody. So read about the diseases of the patients that you're seeing in that office. If you can speak to that and insurance and so forth, that in itself is preparing you to be able to have an excellent interview. If you just understand and dig deeper into the patients that you see during your shadowing and research experience and so forth.
Thank you. Are applicants expected to know what specialty they want to get into before applying? And this is for Ms. Shelton.
You know, that's always an interesting one. You know, we see some students come to us saying, I know I'm going to be a pediatric surgeon and that's all I want to do. And then the next candidate you'll see who says, I know I want to be a physician. And neither one of those is wrong, but that is where you're coming from. I always encourage students to be open. It's more of a problem when the student comes in knowing and saying, I'm going to be whatever it might be, but not being open to other things. As a pre-med student, you've shadowed, you've experienced a variety of things because that's what we ask you to do. But your world is going to be completely rocked wide open as a medical student, and you're going to learn more about specialties that you didn't even know were an option as you become more versed in medical science and what's out there, including, you know, your third-year clerkships. So we like when students come in and, you know, have experienced a variety of options. Maybe you're leaning a direction, but it's really hard for us to say definitively as a interview candidate, I want to be XYZ. My dean gives his example every interview day, and he came into med school and he changed during his residency and went back and redid a residency because he wasn't on the right path. Now he's extremely happy with where he's at and is, but he said, you know, if you would have asked me on my day one of med school, I would have been a surgeon, and he is a pediatric infectious diseases now. So you never know what's going to surprise you and what's going to change your mind. Being open to that is really important.
You know, I always find that interesting when someone comes up to, a student comes up to me and I say, so what do you want to do when you grow up? And they say, I want to be a surgeon. And I said, how do you know that? I said, have you gotten to medical school yet? I started off undergrad wanting to be a government major, and I took government, and I swear to God, a few minutes into it, I didn't like it at all. And I actually had a professor who was not the most encouraging person either, which probably contributed to my lack of interest. But then I took a psychology class and it stuck, and it just worked for me. And so I would tell you in the same token, be open. But I find it very difficult when a student tells me what they want to do when they really haven't explored everything or had a chance to really have a critical analysis. And that won't happen until you're in medical school. So be open and be aware that you may think you want to go one direction, but life sometimes takes you in a very different direction, and if you're not open to that, then my concern is whether or not you're so inflexible that you are not looking at the world from a picture where we're looking at medicine. So again, be careful. It's okay that you want to have a certain direction, and it's good that experiences took you that way, but be open, because I think in the long run, when you get there, you'll find out where you will be.
Thank you. Dr. Hartwig, under what circumstances would a letter of recommendation from an undergraduate peer who knows the applicant professionally be appropriate? Repeat that, sure. Under what circumstances would a letter of recommendation from an undergraduate peer who knows the applicant professionally be appropriate?
On the question of which kinds of letters of recommendation are most appropriate for your application, first and foremost for us, they should be people who have an extensive relationship with you as much as is possible during your pre-medical time period. If the question specifically refers to an undergraduate peer, maybe not a professor or not a clinician, in our program, those kinds of letters tend to be the kind of letters that come from students' extracurricular experiences, where you might have done 2 years for Teach for America or AmeriCorps or gone on a medical mission. And we don't exclude those letters by any means, but we would hold them to a slightly different standard, meaning first of all, you must still fulfill the letter of recommendation requirement for our program in terms of a science faculty member and a clinician, but additional letters are taken by us. We would expect that if you have had an experience that defines you, that's extraordinary to you, and that you want to promote into visibility for our review, and somebody who shared that experience with you found your participation to be meaningful, that the letter would reflect that. It wouldn't simply be a letter to add on to your file or to complement the other letters, but would be significantly different from the other letters because of the value of that experience.
Thank you. Would anyone like to elaborate on that? Would anyone else like to add to that? We can move to the next question. How helpful is it to get published versus just having research experience? We can go Alison, Martin.
For us, and this is where you need to look at the mission of the school that you're applying to, and on average, an applicant will apply to 14 different schools and receive 1.4 interviews. And I think what the question is about, how relevant is research, and is it more relevant to have a publication versus being involved in a research project. So each school is going to differ, and you need to make sure that you understand how they differ in order to plan what you do and your experiences in research. For us at the University of Missouri, of course, being on a publication adds some icing on your application, but it's not going to necessarily get you into medical school. We look at, more importantly, I think, your experiences, your attributes, your academics, your ability to problem solve, to communicate effectively, to work well with others. And so research, you know, honestly, we look at, as a physician, you're going to use research. You need to understand why research is relevant and how it works, because you're going to be using proven methods, empirical methods for which to treat people. So it is an important piece of your application, but for us at the University of Missouri, it's not a deal maker or a deal breaker.
I'd like to add.
Go ahead.
So, very, very good points, Alison. So now, if you're interested in an M.D., Ph.D. program, you may have gotten straight A's, 4.0, 40 on the MCAT. I want to get an M.D., Ph.D. because I'm smart. I also like the fact that I won't have to pay tuition, and I get a little stipend, and I got it going on. However, if you do not have any track record of research, guess what? You're not going to be considered seriously for an MD, PhD program. That's point number one. Point number two, there is a need for more diversity among medical school faculty. One of the ways to make yourself more attractive in regards to being groomed for a faculty position as you go through the ranks of medical school, residency, and so forth, is to have some research background. So in 10 years, you'll be sitting up here talking with a group of aspiring docs. so that research is not, depending on the mission and so forth of your school, is not necessarily going to keep you from being a viable candidate for medical school. But I want everyone in here to be a medical school faculty someday. So I would say it's important.
Thank you. This is our last question from Ms. Shelton. Is youth a disadvantage? Is youth a disadvantage?
Youth. Okay, is youth a disadvantage? That's a great question. I think every applicant comes to us at a different point in life, and it's what you make of it. You know, as a brand new medical school, my first class started about 10 weeks ago, and I got a lot of questions from my faculty of who's the oldest, who's the youngest, this and that, and I kept some of that pretty close to the chest because I wanted them to see the students as they stood in front of them. You know, some of our younger students have amazing stories. So I don't think youth is definitively a positive or a negative. I think every applicant comes to us differently with a different story. Being young has its advantages. Your age doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's who you are and what you bring to the table, whether you're 21 or whether you're 35. It's all a part of who you are and what makes you unique and what you bring to that medical school class. So definitely don't take youth as a disadvantage as you go through the process.
But I do want to add to that, though. One of the things that I'm struggling with right now is I feel like I'm the assistant vice principal at my institution. You know, I deal with all the students who, let's just say they come into the principal's office for reasons unbeknownst. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that emotional maturity, emotional awareness, self-awareness is something that I'm struggling with a group of students who sometimes are not ready emotionally and mentally to begin medical school. There are so many of you neurotic pre-meds who realize that your world have to be in a certain form. And because you are OCD and type A, and you schedule your worlds and you plan in a very specific way, you have to have a plan. But the problem is with that plan is a lot of students aren't emotionally ready to begin the process. And when you come into a point when you're not ready, or you fail, or you have a situation where you're not ready to deal with, your emotional ability to handle stress and deal with different indicators is something that's huge in order for your overall success. So a lot of students taking a year off or 2 years off to do some other skills, to develop some other experiences. A lot of students do things in gap years like city year where they teach for a period of time. You do that, you will be ready for medical school. Or you go for a year and you spend a year in a research lab to work with someone to understand that failure is an option sometimes and realizing how you overcome that. So it's not about youth, it's about your maturity level. And your maturity level will determine your level of success and how, in terms of how other people see you and how other people will evaluate you. So I think, again, asking the question a different way is probably a better way to look at how emotionally mature are you to deal with not only your successes, but your failures. And if you can answer those questions and you show us that you've been able to do things to fall down and get back up, you may become a very wonderful candidate for medical school.
Dr. Hartwig?
You might have seen the rest of us nodding our heads in stark agreement because you touched on one of the most important words for all of our admissions processes, which is self-awareness. There are different ways that we can look for markers of self-awareness in your application. In our program, we look very closely at your GPA in your non-major coursework. We regard that coursework as decisions on your part about what interested you beyond your major of study at the time that you had an unfettered choice in what you learned. We expect you to do very well in that coursework. If you don't do very well in that coursework, it suggests to us that you're not as self-aware as somebody who did do very well in that coursework. So that's a minor element of your application that can speak to us about your self-awareness. The type of volunteering or extracurricular activity that you were able to do, again, in the time frame that you were able to do it. Not everybody has discretionary time in approach to medical school. Many people are working to support their families. Others have an ample amount of discretionary time. But how you decide what to do with that time can tell us how self-aware you are. A candidate who participates in a group effort to raise money for cancer research, that's a wonderful way to spend time. We certainly need money for cancer research. But compare that to an applicant who takes months of volunteer time when you add up all the hours to be a personal care attendant to an adult with cerebral palsy. It's a very different way to spend your time. One is in the moment of a dependent adult who needs you for the most intimate of activities that most of us take for granted. Putting yourself in the moment of that other person shows us how self-aware you are about some of the things that you will encounter in medicine. We need money for cancer research? Absolutely. But we would regard the applicant who made a decision about their discretionary time to be in the moment of another individual very differently. Again, one's not a disadvantage, but one is a great advantage. For a program such as ours, again, to what Alison said, read our mission statement. We're graduating primary care physicians. And that's the kind of decision that we believe down the road you will make as a graduated resident, to be in the moment of others. So self-awareness is the all-encompassing category here. The more we can assume or presume or learn about your self-awareness in your application, the better, because it helps us decide that you are ready for the medical school experience.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwig. And that's all of the time we have for this panel. Thank you all for coming.